Hello everyone! Today I wanted to go over one of the most famous mecha action movies, if not the most famous. Because Pacific Rim, movie that came out in 2013 by the way, still looks really groundbreaking even compared to the movies that recently came out. Not only CGI and the story and the character writing all look amazing, the movie also manages to insert philosophical references from certain Japanese anime and the concept from an actual cosmic horror. Check out scenes from the beginning of the movie in the found footage style, like this shit just looks creepy. And yes, all of that in the Hollywood blockbuster where people fight giant robots and giant mechas cosplaying Power Rangers. With only budget of 180 million, the movie actually manages to show so much. So let's talk about that much and why current movies can get nowhere near beauty of Pacific Rim.
Years before, you wouldn't have picked my brother Yancey and I for heroes.
Heroes don't look like me, not in the real world.
Yeah, the movie starts with a cliche that the main characters are just like me for real, but still, the movie starts with a lot of action nonetheless. It is right away established that the giant monster is already moving towards the city, so it needs to be stopped. Main characters are getting into the giant robot, while we, the audience, can listen to probably one of the best musical themes in movie history. I'm sorry, I just really like that song. I'm gonna leave a link in the description for those who are interested, so yeah. By the way, speaking of the main characters and them being generic, I watched this movie several times, and for some reason I could never remember their names. Maybe because those two have the weirdest sounding names, Yancey and Raleigh Beckett.
I'm sorry, the who and the what now?
They're getting into giant robot, and not gonna lie, graphics still looks pretty good to this day. But the most impressive part of those robots is not simply the graphics, because, I mean, CGI was always simply the question of the money. You just hire a good CGI artist and you have good graphics. What specifically makes Pacific Rim stand out is not only all the robots move pretty slowly, which simply seems more real, because those robots feel actually heavy, and that adds to the realism, unlike in all the other movies where all the giant robots are usually jumping like tennis balls, and it doesn't feel like they have any weight. In addition to that, Tim Wilson, the sound designer for the Jaegers, did amazing job, because all the robots, again, unlike in other movies where they simply do the sounds, actually sound like they're made of metal.
That's the sound of the Ford Motor Company.
The Jaeger moves successfully to the mission, and even though I can agree that it is kinda goofy that the robot just stands up straight in the middle of the ocean when it's supposed to be like a few thousand kilometers deep at least, but I still really like this beginning because it changes tone again, cutting from kinda goofy beginning to a serious tone. Turns out there's some random fisherman boat, of course, floating right in the middle of giant monsters fighting. And of course they need to be saved. The characters, of course, despite many requests to follow orders, do not follow orders and heroically save the boat from the kaiju. And I don't even know if I should call it a cliche, because at this point, main characters not following orders and heroically save someone is pretty much a requirement for action films. However, despite pretty efficient beating of the kaiju eventually gets an upper hand, and manages to eat one of the brothers, damaging the robot. The remaining pilot, Raleigh, of course can pilot the robot by himself, however. With a struggle, but he can. He charges a strong weapon and fires.
Son of a fuck!
The battle scene fades away and we cut to some random explorers in Antarctica, whose regular day is interrupted by this. Not gonna lie, overall, a pretty strong opening of the movie. A pretty well established dark tone, monster size of a skyscraper that can pretty much eat you alive if you're not fight back. Yes, it is a little bit stupid that the characters establish right away that you cannot pilot a giant robot by yourself. You will simply die. Main character does that, however, without any problems whatsoever. And I get that it's main character powers, essentially, but I mean, another character who does the same thing in the movie. He almost dies, and it is clearly stated that he cannot pilot giant robots anymore because if he does it even once, he will die. However, despite all of this, when I was watching this movie for the first time, even though it was only first couple minutes, the movie blew my head away. This is honestly genius because Guillermo del Toro actually managed to create a really interesting setting, which, for the most of it, because of incredible action, doesn't feel that scary when we're talking about a movie with a concept where aliens in the parallel world opened an interdimensional portal at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean and started sending giant Lovecraftian monsters to conquer our world. I absolutely love the core concept of this film, and it's a real shame that a sequel that was supposed to explore that core concept became complete trash. But okay, we'll talk about it some other day. And, wait a minute. Giant Lovecraftian monsters that attack cities around the world that usually appear one at a time, people piloting giant robots that mimic those monsters. And later it is revealed that all of the kaijus are going to the one very specific place on the planet, and if they come in contact with that place, it will cause destruction of all living creatures. Bruh, that's literally Evangelion but the movie. Yes, it's no secret that Guillermo del Toro was inspired by the Evangelion while working on this movie, and by mecha genre in general. And honestly, still there's nothing wrong with adapting some of the concepts, especially when movie manages to introduce much more, unlike some other projects that were inspired by Evangelion and its messages. Generally, even if we're stretching it, the Pacific Rim mostly only adapts the world-building aspects. And let's be honest, Pacific Rim, unlike Evangelion, at least manages to explain the world-building, and doesn't need alternative endings or rebuilds so you understood what the hell is even happening.
But there's this big war trying to, like, basically destroy humanity because humanity has free will, and there's a decision to which level we want to go to. We have free will.
Raleigh, after the loss of his brother, retires and now works at the construction of the Pacific Wall. While that was happening, we saw the head of Jaeger program talking to the Ziele Council, basically all of the world leaders, telling the guy that they're not gonna support giant robots idea anymore. Instead, they're gonna dedicate all of their resources and money to building a wall. Like in real life, however, there is absolutely no problem for the aliens to cross the wall, making the main character question it, since the wall has absolutely no effect. Of course, after that, the main character is once again called to pilot a giant robot once again, because there is not a lot of them left. Marshall Stalker... Yes, his name is actually Marshall Stalker Pent.
Now that's just funny.
Or Brawl, the character who's like Dr. Newton. I'm sorry, but to me, naming characters who are scientists Dr. Newton is pretty much the equivalent of calling evil villain Dr. Doom. Like, it's just hilarious. Speaking of Dr. Newton, actually, because he's gonna have quite an interesting arc in this movie, and a terrible arc in the sequel, but we don't talk about that. He explains to Marshall that he has this brain of a kaiju that potentially can carry an important information. So he proposes to use same technology as mind connection from Jaegers to try and mind connect with this brain. Only everybody starts laughing at him and calling him crazy. And okay, I do realize that everybody's calling him crazy, essentially, so at some point he snapped and did it while nobody's watching. And this way jump-starting his arc. But also, why is nobody taking him seriously? He's the only scientist they have who knows biology of the kaijus. But everybody for some reason acts like they know better, and like they know that kaijus definitely have no memory of anything, and definitely carry zero important information, even though, well, these are kaijus, Lovecraftian monsters from a parallel dimension. You'd think there's like a ton of possibilities to study them. And here you just have a person who volunteers to learn the entire thing, but you just denied because it can be dangerous and probably worthless. But okay, to be fair, like I said, second arc of this character is important because he essentially becomes almost the second main character. The plotlines made in this movie are essentially quite interesting because they're usually one covering the other. And when plotline of Raleigh slows down, the plotline of Dr. Newton speeds up. Let me explain. When the Raleigh comes to the base, he needs a co-pilot, but unfortunately he's not really compatible with anyone, as most of the time to have a good connection with a second pilot, you need to share a lot of memories, or at least a lot of feelings. That's why him and his brother were so good at piloting the robot, and that's why you can't just put two random people together and expect them to perform well. After some trial and error and sparring session with this girl, Mako, they both want to pilot together because they both bounce really well off of each other. However, like I said, it's not that easy because almost all the characters on screen have somewhat of a backstory that prevents them from simply progressing plot forward. In case of Mako, it's a tragic backstory where her parents were killed due to a giant kaiju, and as such, now where she's put into a robot, she kinda goes crazy, Shinji kinda style, and almost blows up the whole base. As such, Marshall puts them on hold and not allows them to pilot Jaeger unless it's really necessary. Once again, quite nice parallel with anime Evangelion, where characters also had to overcome their emotional troubles to defeat the angels and pilot Evangelions, and the more mental problems they had there, the less success they had in battle. In addition to that, we get a small scene between him and Mako where he explains that he does it not only because she and Raleigh are like bad compatibility basically, but also because he cares for her as a parental figure. And like I said, this is where plotline of Raleigh kinda slows down, allows plotline of the Doctor to really shine. Because bro snaps after all of the bullying and decides to do an illegal experiment and connect himself with the brain of Kaiju. Of course, he learns a bunch of information that all of the kaijus that we see on screen right now are like the smallest ones possible, and the biggest one didn't show up only because whoever sent them just didn't feel like it yet. Marshall right away realizes that they need to connect to another brain to learn more information about the kaijus. He sends Newton to the wait, what's his name again? Hannibal Chow. Okay, first of all, why he doesn't look like this? Second of all, bro, I was joking about the goofy names earlier, but like, come on. Hannibal Chow, played by Ron Perlman, is actually the shining star of this arc.
Just because the apocalypse is here doesn't mean you can't look and feel your best.
Not only he's incredibly charismatic antagonist, but I mean, he's not really an antagonist, he basically sells kaiju spare parts on the black market. But like I said, most of the characters have mental problems upon themselves, and because of that they cannot progress the plot forward. In this case, Chao is just a jerk, so he stalls Newton as much as possible, which is pretty entertaining, until he convinces Chao by explaining that he already connected with the kaiju brain, which freaking terrifies him. Everything is interrupted, however, because two plots converge when two more monsters attack the city. And here we're going to take a little step back to explain another small subplot about the friend of Dr. Newton. It is kind of interesting, but it's also kind of stupid. Basically, Gottlieb is a scientist who is a mathematician, so he predicted that eventually the number of kaijus who are exiting the portal is gonna increase, but it doesn't really make much sense in my opinion, because literally the kaijus are appearing more and more often. If before they were appearing every week, now they're appearing every 6 days. So therefore he concludes that next time there should be appearing 2 instead of 1.
In the beginning, the kaiju attacks were spaced by 24 weeks, then 12, then 6, then every 2 weeks. Marshal, we should witness a double event within 7 days.
Like, bro, this is not at all connected. The only proof you have is that kaiju's appearing more often. Why he jumps to conclusion that there's gonna be 2 instead of 1 now? I don't know, math, I guess?
Yes, science!
Anyhow, like I said, the two plots converge. As in Raleigh's plot, we realize that 2 kaijus are attacking the city, but because him and Mako are underperformed, Marshall kept them at the base, only sending 3 of the remaining robots. But then also for some reason tells one of the Jaegers to also stand on standby and not join the fight. And okay, that from the writer's point of view, I get it, it's done, so we had some action, and then those characters were taken out, so we had more tension in the upcoming fight, because now we know there's only 2 of the Jaegers remaining on the planet. That's it. But as a result, that looks is kind of stupid because they sent 3 robots and 2 of them get offed. Like, yeah, they had their, like, 15 minutes of fame, but then they got offed because the kaijus just outsmarted them. Of course, now Mako and Rolly are basically the last resort, so they're sent to the fight. And, like I said, all the fights look exceptionally good. The fighting movements, the battle tactic, the sound effect, everything looks really good. I even love the little detail on why kaijus have to fight Jaeger one by one, because essentially they split up, so one of them can go look for Newton, who kinda appears as other kaiju to kaijus because of this previously established connection with Brain. I mean, it doesn't really lead to anything else than that, but I mean, at least it's sorta explained. After literally exploding one of the kaijus with a gun, which I feel like they should have used quite more, Mako and Raleigh are going into the city to find another kaiju, and I really want to point out the aesthetics of this film. Because you see, in many of my other reviews, I usually complain when the final battle is set in a rainy scene, where you barely can see anything because of the rain. Usually it's done to hide the lack of details due to a small budget, but oh boy, this movie managed to utilize this thing really well. Because not only every fight scene happens in the middle of the night, but not only movie manages to explain why there's always a lot of light present, but it also creates this really unique atmosphere with helicopters that flashlight at the fighting monsters, neon signs of the night city that kinda looks like holograms in the Jaegers
That looks so good, it should be illegal.
Anyhow, of course the Jaeger managed to defeat the last monster, with the boat that definitely should have been broken once they picked it up. But oh boy, using cargo boat as a samurai sword instead of actual sword is freaking great.
Show us that switching to secondary is faster than reloading.
Ah, that's hot. That's hot.
Everyone's chilling until they realize there's only 2 robots left, and most likely next time kaiju show up, it's gonna be at least 2, but maybe more of them. As a result, this whole thing needs to be wrapped up. They're constructing a bomb onto one of the robots, who is going to jump into the rift and close it. Meanwhile, while this was happening, Newton and Gottlieb actually connected to the kaiju another time. Which is cool because it wraps up their arc, they're finally becoming friends, accepting each other's weird science, but it's kind of weird how they got this brain, because turns out one of the kaijus that Jaeger killed was pregnant, which is kind of weird because it was previously established that they were clones. How was the clone pregnant? I mean, I don't know. Therefore, they were able to gather information that you cannot simply just jump into the rift between worlds. You need to be a kaiju, or at least carry kaiju DNA, so that the rift would let you through. And on one hand, it's a good twist, because I didn't really think about it before. But on the other hand, I feel like that should be obvious, because you're telling me so that in all the years that kaiju were attacking, nobody tried to nuke the rift? Like, they just let it exist? Right, the finale comes in, and not gonna lie, if tension was rising before, and here it starts to rise exponentially. Because not only Jaegers are now in uncharted territory where kaijus are just swimming all around them, Gidsby falls really quickly right away and is heavily damaged. They learn that they somehow have to jump into the portal with the kaiju. Meanwhile, even bigger kaiju appears out of nowhere. As such, Marshall and the other guy who was important, but I also couldn't remember his name, sorry, have to sacrifice themselves. And I mean, honestly, it was pretty tragic, because so far, all the relationship between Marshall and Mako were pretty wholesome, and I actually shed a tear when it happened.
It was a pleasure, sir.
I'm not crying because I'm sad, really, because I'm not. No.
Oh, and also, can we just as a society agree that dialogues like this should be just, like, burning in hell?
What are they doing?
Finishing the mission.
Yeah, no shit, Sherlock.
underwater explosion was pretty cool as Mako and Raleigh jump into the portal with the kaiju. And here's the thing, I really like this look of the other dimension. It actually does look like this beyond of our comprehension place. And I'm actually glad that before that we were only seeing it via small short flashbacks in the kaiju brain, and that right now we only glanced at it for a short period of time. But I still think it's kinda stupid that the main characters got ejected from the robot, successfully traveled back to their dimension, and none of them died. And I get it that the movie is essentially really good roller coaster ride, where everything's set up really well and works off of each other, but I expected it to have more or less a dark tone. And it feels even weirder now because we know that Raleigh doesn't show up in the sequel, so I don't know, it feels like it would have been kind of a better message if those characters sacrificed themselves, or at least Raleigh, because he, for the last 5 minutes of the movie, was struggling to set up a reactor so it would blow up in this parallel dimension and close the portal for good. Instead, no happy ending when Raleigh and Mako are gonna live happily ever after, and even though I like this character's chemistry, I mean, I don't know, like I said, the movie had a dark tone for the most of it, so that's at least what I was expecting when I saw it for the first time. In conclusion, Pacific Rim is definitely one of my favorite movies of all time, and if you disagree with me, I mean, you're welcome to discuss it in the comments, give me a like, subscribe if you like this video. I'll try to post more videos like this when where I analyze movies and why I think they're pretty good. Next video is probably gonna be about anime, but I also have a few ideas about Pacific Rim franchise if you like this video. There is Pacific Rim anime and the horrible sequel, which are gonna be fun to discuss, I'm sure. So, yeah, bye.